How you doing? My name is Jim Novak. I'm a Business Applications MVP. Just received my second MVP award, so I'm pretty excited about that. Thanks for joining my session. I'm going to be doing a session called CDS and Model-Driven Apps, the Enterprise Solutions Platform. I work for Futures Consulting. I have my own consulting business. It's me, and I've been doing this for about 10 years in Dynamics, starting out with CRM4, which has now evolved into the Power Platform. And what we're going to be talking about is CDS, which is called the Common Data Services. And we want to look at how we can leverage model-driven apps to build enterprise-level business applications for your organization. Basically, we want to look at how we can leverage CDS to build line of business solutions as opposed to custom development. And that's what we're going to take a look at here. So let's take a look at the agenda. So first thing we're going to take a look at is just answer the question, what is the Common Data Service? Where does it come from? A little bit of history, and what are the major talking points about the platform? Then we're going to dive in a little bit more detail. We're going to look at the core features that would be relevant to building business solutions, building line of business application solutions on the platform. Some of the key elements that you want to look at as a development team, as a project team, whether you're a business analyst or a hardcore developer, or even an executive in your organization. Why would I choose this? Once we go through those, we're going to then take a step back and we're going to say, okay, let's say we choose this. How does it benefit my organization? These are really neat features, but what is my return on investment if I choose this? What do I get out of it if I choose the Power Platform Common Data Service as a business applications platform? We'll step back a little bit further after that, and we'll take a look at the Power Platform and all the other parts and how CDS fits into it and how you can leverage these other components as part of building your solutions. And then what we'll take a look at, we'll just look at a couple of examples of real CDS solutions in the wild. What's really out there? What are businesses building? And some examples of things you might want to build or you might be able to leverage a platform to build in your organization. And then we'll jump into a demo. We're going to jump into a CDS environment. We're going to build out some simple components, and then we'll dive into a more full-blown system that's already been built and look at the moving parts. Building a full-blown system from scratch is a little bit outside the time constraints for our session here, but we should get a good idea of what it's like to work in the system, build out some custom entities, build out some custom data structures, and then look at how we automate our processes. And then after that, we're going to have some homework. This session cannot cover everything with Common Data Service. There's just too much to it. It's an extremely broad and powerful platform by design. It's evolved over the years, and we just can't cover it all. So what I'd like to give is a little bit of further reading, go to some learning resources, and how to just jump in and start building your own solutions. So let's answer the question. What is the Common Data Service? The easiest thing to do is go to the website and get the definition. So right here we have the Common Data Service, lets you securely store and manage data that is used by business applications. Okay, so we need to translate that into something that's meaningful to us. So basically what this means to me and what I've been working on for the last several years is I can build enterprise-grade cloud-hosted relational database services. And if you notice, I have it italicized. It's not a database. We're not just building a database. We're not just putting together tables and fields and all the things related to capturing data. We're going to be building a whole bunch of other services that we can use to automate this data. We can capture data from our end users. We're going to build applications on this, not just a database that sits there and just houses data. And where this comes from is the CDS, the Common Data Services platform, includes tools for building these data-centric applications. They include tools for building user interfaces, building business process automation, and offering up several ways of doing integration with external systems. So CDS is more than just data. It's not just building a database. It's not just downloading SQL Server, installing it, and putting together some data tables. It's building an application that is focused and starting with the data. And that's really meaningful to business applications, business solutions for enterprises. I've got data and I want to put some processes around it, and I want to let my users interact with it. And that's what CDS really gives you. So the reason I mentioned a little bit of the history is it's been around for a while. Originally, the Dynamics CRM platform included the tools that CDS offers. Originally, Dynamics CRM, I started in CRM4, just missed the cut of CRM3. And what it allows you to do is build out data tables, build out relations between these entities, which represents a data table. We'll get into that in a minute. and put the relationships together and then put some processes around it. Allow users to collect the data, allow them to work with the data, use it, view it, share it, and also lock it down with security. So all of these things have now been moved up into their own platform called Common Data Services. So it's been around for a while and it's pretty solid. And that makes it's whenever you talk to your business customers, they might be a little bit nervous about bringing on some new technology. It's not really new. It's just surfaced a little bit differently. They've decoupled the solutions themselves and given you the platform to work with on your own. The other part of this is Common Data Service is an implementation of the Common Data Model. It's a subset. What the Common Data Model is, all those applications coming from like Dynamics CRM and other solutions represent some common business components that a lot of different organizations use, a lot of different industries use. For example, CRM included accounts and contacts, two data entities that are fairly common to most people. An account represents a business and a contact represents a person. So what they've done is they said, hey, let's propose a standard for these. And that's what the Common Data Model is. It's a standard specification for business-centric data entities. And the CDS is an implementation of CDM. And when you install or you get a new subscription for CDS, you get those data entities and the implementation of them. So the reason I mention it is this is not just Microsoft's version of things, it's Microsoft's take on a series of common industry standard entities that you can start off your solution with. And it's done with a partnership. It's a coalition of different organizations. I believe Adobe is involved with it as well. So there's some pretty heavy hitters involved in this Common Data Model. So when you use Common Data Services, you're not just grabbing Microsoft's version of the world, they're putting out a standard for everybody. So you're gonna speak a common language when you choose Common Data Service. So let's do a little bit of a investigation, a little more detail into some of the core features offered. Talked about data modeling. You can see a very quick example of one of the screens. That screen represents a record of data in a database. And what we can do with Common Data Services is we can design out complex entity relationships. We can have an entity represents a table, if you're familiar with database structures, whether it's, again, SQL Server, Sybase, Oracle, even Access. You got a database table and you've got fields. So you've got columns in a table, you've got your fields, and that's what you can build in CDS. That's where you start. You start with your data. And you then, what you want to do is say, well, how do I collect this data from my end user? You start building your forms and you give screens to your end users. And that's what we're looking at here. This represents one record and you can see the fields associated with it. And then the next thing you do is you associate the records, you build relationships. And that's pretty powerful. You're building a relational database system, a relational database services that can be put in front of your user without writing a line of code. And that's pretty important. So model-driven apps are the next step in this. Once I've got my entities defined, once I've got my data tables, attributes, I've got my fields defined, I've got my forms defined, like we're seeing on the screen, I can package that up and I can say, here's a targeted experience that I'm packaging up as an app in Common Data Services. So CDS and model-driven apps, as you can see in the title, they're tightly coupled. I'm going to build my data and I'm going to allow users to interact with it, and I can design that and package it up as an app. And that's really where the model-driven apps come in. And then business processes are part of this package as well. We're not just doing data. We're not just collecting it and giving a place to enter it. We want to help you work with the data. We want to automate some business processes. One of the things you see on the screen here is what's called a business process flow. And what it'll do is give you a way of giving your end users a visual indicator of where they are in the process. This is not just collecting data, it's giving them instructions and guidance on how to work with the data. And that's a pretty powerful thing as well. Behind the scenes, you can automate some steps, you can call out code, you can build workflows, lots of different pieces and moving parts for doing your business process automation. Our continued screen, we got a big long list of things we want to talk about. Next in the line is security. So we've got all this data, we want to put it in front of people, got to make sure it's secure. If I've got a business solution that has sensitive data in it, or I just want to protect my intellectual property, I want to make sure I lock it down. When you log into CDS, you use Azure Active Directory as your authentication method. By default, that's what you get. You log into Office 365, you're granted a license of CDS, and then you can access your CDS database. Next, once you're in that CDS database, once you're allowed to log into it, then you have authorization. And we have two methods, two very high-level methods. One's called business unit, and another one's called role-based security. That allows us to segment the data and kind of put it in its own little package so that we know that only the right people are seeing the data they should be seeing. Role-based security is a fairly common thing in different applications, so it should be familiar with you, the concept. But what CDS gives you is a very powerful method for configuring this without writing a line of code. And business units are another just layer of wrapping up your data into segmented units that only certain users can see. Very powerful, again, not a line of code written for any of these things. If you want to write some code, that's where the extensibility platform comes in. I can inject custom code both on the server and on the user interface. So on the client side, I can put some code in, as we see here, that I can customize the UI with what's called the PCF framework, Power Apps Component Framework, shortened to PCF. I can build custom user interface components and plop them on my form, and we'll see an example of that in our demo. And I can also just inject some custom JavaScript in it. What if I want to have some custom validation on a screen that I can't really do with a configuration? I can write some code to do it. On the server side, I can build out very complex background processes for integration or even just automating some processes using C# code. And I can inject that in what's called the execution pipeline. Whenever a record is created, saved, updated, deleted, I can inject some code and respond to those events and do some custom logic. So I have the base platform managing all of the creation and saving the data for me. I don't have to write any code for that. But if I want to do something special, I can inject some code at any of those different points. And then last, we have some options for integration. I can integrate with external services through a couple of different methods. One of the most popular is a REST endpoint. And we see that with the Power Platform. We have custom data connectors. We'll see an image here in a moment where they talk about data connectors. And they can connect the CDS data, both the configuration, the metadata, and the actual record data with your solution using these REST endpoints. So I can build out all kinds of things, whether it's using a custom connector and automating Flow, using Flow to automate things, a Power Automate Flow, or I can build out a custom website that uses CDS as my back end. It's a pretty powerful method that's built in. Whenever I define my entities we talked about earlier, I've automatically got a method for accessing that data and the schema around it. Really, really powerful without, again, writing a line of code. It allows me to focus on my business problem. Now that we've seen some of the core benefits, how do I realize those benefits in my enterprise? In my organization, let's say I chose CDS as my line of business platform. Got a bunch of legacy apps I want to modernize. Let me bring them up and bring them into a common platform called CDS. Where do I see the benefits? Well, as we talked about, I mentioned it a couple of times, it's low code, no code. They're in bold. You've probably heard that a lot if you've been following the Power Platform over the last couple of years. Citizen developers, another phrase that have kind of died down a little bit. But what it allows me to do is I can talk to my business analyst. I'm a developer, it's my background. But if I'm a PM or a developer, I can go to a functional or a business analyst and say, help me build a system. And they can do an enormous amount of work. In fact, they may not even need a developer. You can build an enterprise grade system. The database, the business logic, the front end, the security can all be done by somebody who doesn't have to write a line of code. That's pretty powerful. Because it's a common platform, pun intended, common data service, it's a common platform, so it should look familiar to all your users. You've got the built-in authentication, the built-in data designers, you've got the built-in security modeling, you got all these different things built in that multiple different teams can be talking the same language when they're building their systems, and the end users will know what it looks like because they're familiar with the existing model-driven apps in their screens. So it's a familiar environment, a familiar platform for both developers and your end users. Now, the next part of this, and didn't really get into that in the prior screens, but I can take these solutions and move them around fairly easily. There's some built-in processes for ALM, application lifecycle management, as part of CDS. If I want to build a component, like I mentioned, the PCF component, for example, user interface component, or the entire solution, an entity structure, an entity schema, I can take that, package it up, hand it off to another system and let them use it and leverage it in their components. So it gives you a way of using, putting together a lot of shared code, a lot of common libraries, and even just common methodologies for building solutions. And side benefit of this is because it's a consolidated IT infrastructure, big words there, but what it means is it's cloud hosted, single management. I can manage multiple environments in one place. There's what's called a Center of Excellence toolkit. I got a link for it in the slides, where it gives you some guidance on managing your center of excellence for your enterprise. How does everybody talk the same language when building these power apps and these model-driven CDS-driven apps? you've got one administrative area for these things. It's not just one person necessarily if you're doing a lot of different solutions, but it's all managed in one place. Your data centers can go away. You put everything in one place for your engineering and your IT department to manage, and it really lowers your costs. The overall overhead associated with managing these solutions is much lower than building out a data center, managing your systems, doing install updates, all that fun stuff, all the license that goes with it. The other part of this you see in the diagram is with all of that, it allows me to have my team focusing on the business problem as opposed to plumbing. I don't want to have a developer worry about how people log in. I want them to put out features and functionalities that your end users are going to be able to take advantage of to solve their business problems. So more features and less plumbing. And that's a big deal whenever you're writing custom code. If I'm building a custom system from scratch, build a database, build a web front end if it's a web-based system, build all the business logic, all that I own. With the platform, I start out with solving the business problem, and I let my configuration is my starting point. So I got an 80% solution with a lot of the plumbing right out of the bat, right out of the gates. So back up a little bit further, Microsoft's Power Platform. CDS is a core component of this, and this should be familiar. This diagram's been around for quite a while. It's a lot of websites, a lot of slide decks, and I stole it myself right off of Microsoft's site. And you can see you get a couple of layers here. So you got Power BI, Power Automate, Power Apps, Power Virtual Agents. What's a Power? And they're built on Data Connectors, AI Builder, and Common Data Service. So the Common Data Service can serve as your data layer for all these different components. I can pull data from Power BI and do reports and analytics. I can build a Canvas app that pulls in Common Data Service data as well as administering data using a model-driven app. Power Automate, same thing. I can connect to CDS. I can automate operations in my system, and I can connect to other solutions. And Power Virtual Agents, I can put custom virtual agents on top of the CDS business processes. When it wasn't mentioned in here, I wanted to bring up, and we'll look at it briefly in the demo, is Power Apps portals. I have this Common Data Service backend. I've got a model-driven app for my end users. What if I want to expose the data to end users outside of my organization? I can put a Power App portal in front of it, expose that data, and build some additional logic with it. So, so a couple of examples. So talked about early on, we're going to look at some examples. Well, mentioned CRM, which is now customer service. We've also got Dynamics CRM, sales, Dynamics marketing, field service, project operations, Power Apps portals. All of this could be familiar if you're familiar with Dynamics and its suite of tools. Those are now model-driven Power Apps. That was mentioned in an offhand comment by one of the managers at Microsoft a couple of years ago, and that was the light bulb went off in my head. The Common Data Service is being used by Microsoft to build its own products. And that's really a big deal. If they're going to sell us this platform to build our own solutions, they better have confidence in it. And they've got enough confidence in it to build their own tools on top of it. So I believe it was as of V9, whenever the Power Platform and CDS came out as its own sort of standalone thing, they started building sales. They re-architected their entire solution stack to use CDS under the hood. That's pretty cool. That's a big confidence builder with this system. If you want to see some other examples, Microsoft puts out what's called solution accelerators. You can see a list of most of them here. And they're basically put out a predefined system that's very, very functional, pretty broad in its functionality, depending on the one we're talking about, depending on how long it's been around. And they're building out these solutions and giving it to us for free. So for example, not-for-profit or nonprofit is fairly new, education is fairly new, but the healthcare accelerator has been around for a couple of years. Very extensive, lots and lots of functionality, lots of data, lots of business processes, and lots of thought put into what you would need in a healthcare world versus what's going to be used in a nonprofit world. Cool thing is, if I run a nonprofit, not-for-profit organization, I might be able to just go download that solution accelerator and I've got a solution on CDS. I don't have to build anything. I don't have to do any more work. So Microsoft is telling us how to use a solution by giving us real solutions. So it's a really good, and I've got a link for this in the slides, really good place to look for ideas if you have a solution that you need to build. If you've got an organization that might have automotive, healthcare, nonprofit, manufacturing, for example, these are great places to go learn what the capabilities are and have a nice 80% solution sometimes starting out right out of the gates. So a demo. So let's jump in and do a real quick demo here. And what we're going to do is we're not going to build out a full system. We're going to talk about what it would be, what if I wanted to manage an event like this one, right? So we're having a day-long event, and I have got, all of the information about an event. I've got all the sessions, I want to be able to schedule all that fun stuff. What if I want to build my own? Well, CDS is a great choice for that. I've built one of my own, and what we'll do is we'll walk through, we'll dive into an environment, we'll take a look at some of the moving parts. We'll actually build some entities, we'll build some views, some forms, and we'll look at how things relate. And it'll jump into, as I joke around, it's kind of like going to the cooking show. You put the turkey in the oven and you pull out a fully baked one. We're going to jump right into a fully baked solution and just look at some of the stuff going on under the hood. So what I've done, and I have a link for this as well. So what I set up, how can you get in and start working yourself with the Power Apps Common Data Service framework? Well, what Microsoft offers is a Power Apps community plan. You can just look this up. I got a link for it, and it gives you a free environment. So just jump in and start building. And like I said, I have a link for this in the slides. And if you've got an active Office 365 account, it'll just tack on this environment to your account, and you can start building things. And what that looks like is this. So let me go to the home screen, make the screen a little bit easier to read. So if I go to the Power Apps, this is called make.powerapps.com. This is the maker screen. So if you're going to build a solution, I'm going to come in and we're going to start out with what's called an environment. An environment is basically a container for your data and all the related components for your solutions. If I'm going to build this system for event management, and we'll call it Power Up Events, because that's what I'm going to be calling it in a minute, I want to have a database associated with it, and I want to have my model-driven app, and all the pieces I build as part of an environment. It's segmented from other environments in my organization. If you notice, this is my personal Office instance. I've got two environments. That's the default, and I've got a new one. If I put a database over here, completely independent of this environment on this side. So a nice way of segmenting things, first and foremost, by environment. So what I've done, in the interest of time, is already created a database. So, because it takes a few minutes, I don't want to sit here and have you guys watching the screen spin. But whenever I set this database up, what it did is created a blank CDS database for me. And I can start creating apps now. And you can see, well, I've got a couple different choices. Canvas apps are the popular ones. I've got a portal that I mentioned, but model-driven apps is what we were talking about creating. And you can see there's lots of, by the way, here's a list of apps. There's lots and lots of learning resources on these different sites. Literally learn about Power Apps. Lots of really good stuff. I definitely recommend jumping in and just looking at the home screen on a regular basis. But what I'm going to look at is I'm going to look at my database, because we're talking about CDS and model-driven apps. And I can jump right in here and I can start looking at entities. So when I have entities popping up on my screen, what do I mean? I just created a blank database. I didn't create any of this. Well, back to whenever we talked about the common data service and common data model, common data service being an implementation of the common data model, we see a whole bunch of entities here, and I'm just looking at the default view, not even all of them. Here are the entities I was talking about. This comes from these entities we're looking at, these database structures, these data structures. Here we see account, address, email. Fact should be, pretty intuitive as to what they are. These already exist in a blank database. Like I didn't have to do anything except please give me a new database, and magically they appeared. If we look at this, let's open up a contact real quick, as it just represents a person, should be fairly familiar. What I can look at is, I got a ton of stuff. There's lots and lots and lots of information here, but it also gives me a nice overview of what the capabilities are. I installed a new database. This is a common data model representation, an implementation of the common data model representation of a contact. It's a little bit hard to say. I'm sure I'm screwing it up a little bit, but basically this is the implementation of a contact based on the common data model spec. So I got two things. I've got all the fields defined for me. There's lots and lots and lots, but I've also got lots of fields and lots of information defined for me that's based off of a common specification. If you go and want to connect to another system that implements contact, you could be speaking the same language if they conform the common data model. Just something to think about when you build your solution. But first and foremost, I just want to see how much work is done for me. And you can see here, these are all the fields. When we go back up, the header doesn't scroll, but the fields, I've got relationships. This is the core of an entity. These are the working, moving parts as part of an entity. First off, fields. I've got a database table, and it's got attributes or fields that make up this entity definition. And you can see here it's common stuff, and they're named in a very intuitive way: address, address 1, there's a convention address 2, and then we get down into a little bit more information about business phone, different demographic information, credit hold, credit limit base. These are different currency types. The next thing we look at is actually this data type column. And you can see in a database table, like let's say SQL Server, you've got strongly typed data types. CDS, you've got the same thing. It's an abstraction. We're not looking at the database directly, we're looking at the services in front of it. But it gives me the ability to define multi-line text, option sets, general just text boxes. An option set is what's called a drop-down, a pick list in certain situations, depending on who's designing your system. Unique identifiers, which is under the hood, it's exactly what it is. In SQL Server, got a floating point number, lots and lots and lots of stuff here. I've got a text box defined. I know it's going to be a phone number, really powerful stuff. And if I click on any of these, you can see the details of it. So I'm designing a database here. I haven't done anything. This was done for me, but you can see that we're designing under the hood database elements that you would have to do by hand. Here I can come in as a non-developer and build out a very strongly typed database. I've got the required stuff. This allows me to put it on the form. I've got description so I can self-document. I've got auditing features baked into the system, which we really didn't talk about. I can define the max length, so this puts validation in. Whenever I try to enter the information into the address field, I can't go over 1,000 characters. CDS gives me that. I don't have to write a code for that. Next thing is relationships. And again, we're looking at the default view. Let's see if there's any more in all. Lots and lots and lots of relationships. And again, we're building a relational database system without having to write any of the scripts or get into the database itself. I'm right in the web page. I'm just looking at the relationships for a contact alone. You can see there are lots of them. It's pretty core to a lot of the different system, CDS components. Right here, you can see it's related to account, feedback, user, all kinds of different entities already part of the system. Business rules are, we'll test one of these out and we do a real quick example here in a moment, but business rules allow us to put some validation on our forms. A view is basically a saved query. I can predefine some saved views. I can say, give me all the active contacts in the system. Give me, if I've got it, and we'll go into this in our example, inactive contacts. It's a way of activating and deactivating without deleting records built into the system. Associated views, show me which ones are related to each other. Lots and lots of stuff out of the box, but this just allows me to query information about a contact, about the entity type contact, the database table type contact, and save it off as part of my system. This is what I mentioned when I mentioned metadata or schema information about an entity. This is what we're talking about. Forms are the screens we talked about. We'll go into this in 1 second, but here's where I can define a whole bunch of different data entry forms of different types that I'm going to put in front of my user. And we'll see a cool designer for it. This dashboard is exactly what it sounds like. I can put a dashboard together relative to contacts. I can say, here are all the dashboard elements related to a contact. A chart, same thing, exactly what it sounds like. It allows me to define a chart that can be used in other parts of the system. And keys are another element more for the developers to make sure that values are unique if they're integrated with other systems. Going through this kind of quickly right now, but we'll go in and we'll build an entity and we'll focus on a little bit more. And data is built into the designer. I'm in the developer tools, essentially. I'm in the maker portal, but I can also view the data. So I can do a little bit of work, view the data, test it out while I'm developing this. It's a pretty cool system. There's an enormous amount of work that goes into this. And let me open up a form real quick and show you. Let's just see what the form looks like for information. It's called information for a contact. Let's make sure this comes up. It's authenticating, have the login as me. You can see I've got a WYSIWYG designer. What you see is what you get. Designer 4, let me zoom in a little bit, maybe you can see it better. This is the screen that's going to be put in front of your end users. I've got a header area. I've got fields that are on the form broken apart into section. That's what this area is here that I've highlighted. And then up here, I've got tabs. It allows me to break the screen apart into logical groups called tabs and then broken apart again by section. I can put titles on it, pretty standard stuff. This is very common to different environments you've probably worked with, whether it's custom development or other designer tools, but it should be fairly intuitive. I'm gonna put the fields related to a contact on a form and I'll let somebody enter the information about them. What I see here, this is kind of cool, and this we'll go into in a moment. When we build out our event entity, I've got notes and activities. I've got, it's my tab, and on it, I've got a grid. This is essentially grid. It's empty because I don't have any data in here right now. This is showing related information. Once again, we're building a relational database system. without having to build a database. It's pretty powerful. So I can put all kinds of stuff on here. I've got custom controls I can put in. I've got the option where they have the PCF components I mentioned. I've got a couple different options based on what type of attribute it is, what type of field it is. Here's a type lookup, where basically I'm going to look up a related record. In this case, it's a currency entity an entity called currency, where I've got a value called US dollar. And then here I've got an entity of type system user that I can relate to my contact, and that's the owner. And we'll look at that here in a moment whenever we build our own entities. So as you can see, we've got a WYSIWYG editor. On database tables under the hood, we're calling them entities. Names may change. They're putting out new releases as we speak. But I've designed, or Microsoft has given me an already existing design for contacts, accounts, and I lost count of how many different entities are on here if I look at all of them. Some of them you'll never really use directly. Some of them are system entities that are used for the underlying operation of the system. But other ones you can use directly. Again, account and contact are the easy, the low-hanging fruit here. Account and contact, I think some might use all over the place, because I'm going to build a system where I manage people and businesses. Cool, you've got account and contact already built in. So let's build our own, because we didn't even see all the available components. Let's build our own. We wanted an event management system. And what we wanted to do is manage events like this one, like DynamicsCon. But I wanted to track all the information about the event, how to identify what the name of the event is, when the start dates and end dates and all that fun stuff, and then sessions for each. And then a lot more, but those are the things we'll look at right now. We'll build an event entity, and we'll build also a session entity. What I did was I created a solution here called sample, not the most creative in the world. But what a solution is, this is part of the ALM process that I didn't talk about really much at all. I think I mentioned it earlier, but the ALM process is application lifecycle management. I build a solution, a tool, or an application, and I want to hand it off to another environment. I've got dev test staging, for example. I can package it up in what's called a solution and hand it off. And I've got what I've also got as part of this is what's called a publisher. This allows me to distinguish who I am as the developer. And I created one here called, when it comes up, it's going to be called Power Up, because it's the name of the event series that I have a solution for. And what it allows me to do is distinguish between these prefixes here. We see MSDYN, which is Microsoft. I've got one called Power Up, and you can see in the record here, if it pops up real quick, we can see that we put our own prefixes in to distinguish our work from other people's work. So I can take this solution, hand it to somebody, they can use it, or I can take the solution, move it between environments, and that's where we're really beefing up our ALM process. Well, let me just jump back in and we can look at that whenever it loads. What I want to do is I want to go into my solution and create a new entity. But first thing we can see here is I've got a blank CDS environment, and these are all the options, the things that I can do, I can add to my solution. I can build the app, which we've talked about briefly, and I'll go into the example in my other solution. I've got dashboards, I've got entities, environment variables are fairly new. I can put in flows, which are Power Automate flows, UI flows, which are fairly new for robot process automation, RPA. Put in a report, which is an SSRS report, SQL Server reporting services, all kinds of stuff as part, that I can put into my solution and put into my CDS solution, package it up and make it available for other environments. But I want to create an entity, and let's just call it, let's call it Power Up Event. So this is the complex process for creating an entity in our system. And you can see there's a lot of different options here. I've got offline mode for mobile, create and update settings. These have to do with how change tracking is triggered, and we'll invalidate caches for portals and other things going on. Collaboration, I've got different types of features I can enable. I can do activities, which we didn't really talk about. I can use this as an emailable entity. Entity ownership, I've got a custom type of entity first. Entity type and ownership talks about standard versus activity. Activity is a custom, kind of like another variation on a task in email, this common activity type. We're going to stick with standard, and I want it to be owned by a user or a team. If I want to have reference data, let's say I've got a list of those currency items, or I've got a list of states in my system, I can create an entity that represents that and make it not owned by a user, it's owned by the system. So that's where this comes in. So again, they're even thinking ahead of using the data to data drive your system. So it's not just collecting data relative to an event, it's the information associated with the event. And you'll see that in all your other solutions as well. So pretty powerful. They're using their own system to build other parts of the system, kind of this inception world. So I'm going to create a new entity called PowerUp Event, and I'm going to put a couple of fields on it. Right now it's cranking away in the background. It tells you right here, it's provisioning some stuff in the background. I'm going to put in a couple of fields. I want to know, like, let's say the start date. So here's my very, very complex process for creating an attribute. I do new attribute and it gives me details. It's pretty cool. And you can see here, now that I've got a field, I've got tons and tons of different options for types of data that I can store. And each of these isn't just an enumeration of what type of data will be stored. It also comes with some logic. So not only can I say it's text, I want to render this as an email, for example. I want to make sure that the user interface shows this as a URL. So it's not just the data type you're storing and the parameters around it, like say text and the max length. It's also how it can be rendered. So there's a lot going on with just choosing the different data type here. And in our case, we're going to do date and time. I'm going to capture the start date and time. And I'm just going to keep the name the same. And I'm going to go through and I'm going to do a couple of other fields. Let's do the event start date. Event start date. Let's do end. We already did start. Let's do the end date. We're going to do another date and time. Again, very quickly, I can actually go in and I can self-document. I can put in this is the start. And there are other tools like community tools that allow you to use this to document your ERD, your entity relationship diagram, if you want to do that. Pretty cool stuff. Time, you can see some different parameters here for the date and time. In this case, what it says is, again, just an example of the complexity of features that are thrown at you, or the richness of the features thrown at you. I want to show this date and time in user local time. It's going to save it under the hood in some other formats, but whenever it renders to the user, it knows who you are, where you're at, and how it should put in, do the date time offset. It's not always going to be in the GMT date and time, for example. So event date and start, I'm going to put in a field to capture detailed summary. And this will be, I'm going to make this one multi-line text. So I'm going to let him put in a paragraph. Again, the advanced options here are a little bit different based on the type. Now I can see what the max length is. Let's limit it to 2,000 characters. That's the default. But on the user interface, it'll display some multi-line text control. So I'm defining the type and how it's going to be displayed on the entity. Put another field in here, and this is just going to be a Boolean one. I'm going to capture whether this is going to be a virtual event or not. Not the most creative. I'm just going to say is virtual event. And this one is called a to option. And you can see here another change, how I want to render it is showing yes, no. I can change the label for it. So again, I'm able to not just say capture two values, a bit field, but also tell them what did it show and what the default value is whenever it comes up on the screen, enable field security. So again, very powerful stuff. I don't have to write a line of code to do this. I'm thinking about it from the developer's perspective. If I had to write the code for this, it'd be tons and tons of work. And I'm going to capture the address, because if it's not a virtual event, let's make sure they enter in an address into the form. And this one we'll keep it as a text area, not a multi-line text. Under the hood, it'll save it as a like nvarchar versus varchar, and we'll make this 500 characters. And you can see the data is a little bit different. You've also got different types here, and I skipped over this one on the other ones. We can have calculations or roll-up fields. I can say, based on other fields on the form that we collect with this record, I can do a calculation, or I can say, for this entity, go roll up some values based on related entities. We're not going to do that right now, but that's another option as well. So now I save, and what it's going to do behind the scenes is it's going to publish all this information. It was actually very quick, and it's going to make it available for me whenever I go build out other parts of the system. So I want to create a related entity called session. So each event's going to have more than one session. We're in my session right now, so we're going to build something to allow me to capture that. So I'm going to do a new entity again, and we're going to call this one session. Again, very, very complex user interface here, but it's pretty cool. And Very easy. I just created a database table, and I'm very, very spoiled because now I don't have to write all the code to do that. And with this one, we're going to capture a couple of fields, and I'll wait for that comes up. By the way, and I glossed over this earlier, now when I created this entity, you notice this popped up. And these are all the fields that come with the baseline entity. And you notice there's some fields here. A lot of it you might not really ever look at, like import sequence number and version number. These kind of things you may never really work with, but you'll work with created by, created on, modified by, modified on. Every time you modify a record, the system is going to track that for you. I don't have to write code to say who's the last person to modify this if it's a user-owned type entity. That's an enormous amount of work. Another bit of code we don't have to write, and it's common across all entities. So whenever myself and another developer are building another entity, we're going to be talking to each other. We're talking the same language. Very, very cool feature in this platform. Add a couple of fields here for our this one. I'm going to start time for a demo. I'm going to have a start date and time on this one too. So the overall event's going to have a date and time of a start date of like 8 hours, for example. But I want to have a session start and end time as well. And I just decided to call these start time and end time. Didn't get as fancy with the event one. So I'm going to do date and time again, capture another description, just another text field for the session, just allow them to describe what it is. In my case, we would be talking about CDS and model-driven apps. And this is going to be one that's pretty cool. So I'm going to save this. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to create a relationship. And again, to me as a developer coming in, building on a system, I can build a relational system. I keep saying that, but that's a big deal. So what I'm doing right now is I'm going to create a new relationship between my session, my current entity, and the PowerUp event that we created earlier. And a couple of naming conventions, I'm going to call it ID. But what I'm doing is I'm putting in foreign keys under the hood. If you're familiar with database design, under the hood, I'm putting in, I'm linking these two entities together. I'm going to say that this session is related to my PowerUp event. And it's pretty straightforward. It's right here. This information will be used by developers, but it's kind of nice as a functional analyst to have a specification down for how you're going to do this and for how to do this work. But what that allowed me to do is I'm relating my PowerUp event, sorry, we're in session right now, to my PowerUp event. And I did that with a couple of clicks. And there's more options to that too. You can have a cascade delete. So if I delete my event, I can delete the sessions related to it. I left it as relational. So what it'll do is just remove the links. So I went through that very quickly. I created two entities and I created a couple of fields. And now let's look at a form. I want to go to design with the form for a session. And we're back into our designer that we were looking at before. And while that comes up, it's going to come up with some blank information. This is one I would love to report as a bug. It never fills this in. But it gives me, out of the box, when I first created the entity, default field of type name, and I've got an owner. And I've got a tab and a section on it. So I'm going to fix that little error right there, and then I'm going to add some stuff to the form. In fact, what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a component. And this is a user interface component. It's relatively straightforward. It's a layout component. You notice we talked about tabs and sections. I'm going to add two columns, I'm going to remove that. I want to add a one column section underneath, and I want to change this one to 2 columns. So I've got a couple of options here. Tab. I'm on the section, by the way, it's context sensitive. So whenever I choose an area of the screen, it gives me the properties of that. Just call it main. And I'm going to make this one 2 columns so I can put in some fields. And notice that the user interface changed over here. It's, again, as we're working on it, it's refreshing the screen and showing me the real-time view of what it will look like. And then down here, I'm going to start adding fields. I've got the list of fields that are available in the form. We put in the PowerUp event. So I'm going to put in what's called a lookup. It allows me to reference the PowerUp event for this session. Remember, we're in the session. Down here, I created a 1 column, so I want this description field to be fairly wide. So I'm going to make the formatting and make that a couple of columns, or sorry, a couple of rows high, not columns. And I want to put in my start time and end time. Kind of cool. I can just select and click, and it'll pop it in there, start and end time. I don't think I have any other fields over here quite yet. So now I'm going to just publish it, save this off. So in about a minute while I was talking, I designed a screen that's going to be collecting data about a session for a Power Up event. And that's pretty powerful, pun intended. So I've got over on, I want to go back to my main solution area, and I want to go back to, I didn't put a form together for the Power Up event, and I'm going to go open up the main form. I went very quickly there. I just selected the main form like I did for session. And I want to do the same thing, just keep the layout the same. And what I did here was fix the little issue there and make it 2 columns so that I can put in my other fields. Again, follow the same pattern. And what did I have here? I had a event start date, event end date. Oh, see, I can drag them around. I put them in the wrong order. I totally did that on purpose. I'm going to put in a flag called is virtual event. I'm going to put that over here, and then address I'm going to pop over here. So I can, if you've noticed, I've got a couple different methods. Really impressive designer stuff here for that. Seems like it's a given, but there's an enormous amount of work that's being done here. And again, as I've repeated multiple times, I haven't written a line of code yet. I want to insert another 1 column section down here, and then I want to add the detailed summary here. Again, it should be very much like you saw on the other. And here's the distinction. I'm just keeping 1 tab, and I'm going to put another tab on. I'm going to add another section, a 1 column section. And what I'm going to add here is I'm going to add, show me all the sessions associated with this event. How do I show my relational data? I'm going to put a grid in here and just say, show me all of the sessions associated with, show me related records. And I'm going to put a grid in here. And what the system will do is it's smart enough to say, this grid represents sessions. Let me just name it a little bit better. So it represents sessions. And it's going to go behind the scenes, grab all, because it knows about the schema, it knows about the database structure, it knows about the relationships we put together. It's going to go out and grab all the information and show this view called active sessions right on the screen for me. Again, I'm repeating myself a little bit, but it's really important that I'm building a relational database system here without writing a line of code. And I'm designing the data capture elements here without writing a line of code. And it's all going under the hood, and it's storing all this configuration information with a few clicks and allow me to pop between screens and view it as I'm editing it. So what I'm going to do here real quick is go back to my main form. And what I did was I just to recap, I created 2 entities, Power Up event. I've got a related entity. I've got a child entity created 8 minutes ago. That's kind of cool. I've got, and there are sessions that are part of this event, and I'm going to show them on the form for events. I'm going to publish all customizations and make sure all my changes are committed and ready to go. And then we're going to go test it out. So in my developer environment, I'm going to go test it as well. If I'm writing custom code, I'm bringing up Visual Studio, deploying to a database, publishing websites, putting in maybe some code gen to generate a framework for the data retrieval. And then I'm going to publish that website, hit F5 or whatever I'm doing. And here I'm just clicking through a screen, and I'm modifying my data schema, the user interface components, and the relationships underneath. So what I want to do is I'm going to go over here and let's see if this works. I'm under my event entity, and I'm on the data tab. And the only thing we created is we created a couple of fields, relationships, forms, and I'm going to do new record. Right away, it just pops up and allows me to create a new record of type Power Up event. Not very creative in my naming, but I'm going to call it new Power Up event. Put in a start date and an end date, and you notice all these controls are built for me. And it's starting, and we're going to say that it goes from 9 or 8 to 5, just to give you an hour for lunch. 8 to 5 p.m. I didn't write any of those components. They're built-in components as part of the system that should be familiar across all of the solutions you build. Everyone knows how to pick a date. Everyone knows how to pick a time. The text box, as you can see, that it's a couple of rows high. I can put in an address. I can type in some text there, and I've got a Boolean picker here, and I've got a detailed summary. Now what you notice here, I didn't put the labels in, so I could probably hide those or give them a more informative name. And I've got a section down here that's empty, like where's my grid? Well, because it's a relational system, I have to save this record before I can relate other records to it. It's smart enough to not show me a grid and give me some errors. So once I save it, if I did everything correctly, I should now be able to see the grid and add related sessions. And you notice that that all of these tools are built in. It's now saying, here, you can add sessions to your new event you just created with a date and time. You didn't put an address in, but let me create a new session. And it pulls up the form we created for the session. It should look very similar. Oh, that's pretty neat. It's got, it knows who I am. So that's my owner. I've got a profile information. That's my phone number. If you want to give me a call. I'm just going to call it a session, and mine is the first one. We'll say it's from 8 until 9. So now I've got a very simple session. This is awesome. I need to work on my typing, and I can save this off. Down here on the bottom, we've got to save. We've got to save up here. All of this is done, and again, this should be familiar across all of your applications and model-driven apps unless you heavily customize your screen. And I can now click through. When I have these different items called lookups, again, it represents my relational system. Let me go back up and look at the Power BI event that's related to it. And now I've got a new record here. Oh, you know what? I want to show all the fields here. So I can go back very quickly and just show the session and update my view. I think I used active sessions. Now I can update my query. I've got filters, I've got sorting. First, I want to sort by the date. Oh, I have to put the start time and end time in first. I've got point and click for defining my queries and views, and it's giving me a real-time view now that I have data in there. That's pretty impressive. No, I want to move that over. That was out of order. And I can put in the related event. So it's a lookup in the grid. And now let me just put the description in because why not? And I'll remove the created on, put the description in there. Probably not going to be viewable very easily in the real world, but I'm allowed to do it. And publish that. Oh, I forgot to put in my sorting. I want to make sure this is sorted in order of the start time. So it's going to basically be a mini schedule view very quickly while that's publishing. Let's see if I can go back over here and refresh the screen. There we go. So, oh, I'm debugging this on the fly. The cool thing about this, the reason I wanted to show this, and it seemed really simple, is while you're working on this, you can debug and show and render everything without having to stop. You can do this right in front of your customer. You can have collaborative sessions with your customer and design out the system right side by side with them. And one of the things I can put in here, and I think I'm doing okay on time, but I'm going to try to put in very quickly on my event, what I want to add is some business logic, right? What I want to say is I put in that bit field called is virtual event. So I'm going to create a new business rule. And what I want to say is if it's flagged as a virtual event, you don't have to enter in an address. And what we see here is the business rule designer. And if you've worked with Dynamics before, CRM, this should look very familiar to you as of, I believe, 2016, 2015. I forget when it was released. So it should look familiar to you. And what I want to do is set up a condition. If this event, the source is the source field we're looking at is if it's a virtual event, if it is yes, then we do not want to require an address. So what I did was, you can see here the text representation of it. Let me go through this very quickly. So let me do this real quick. I want to put in a virtual event, and I want to say that this is a virtual event. And whenever it's a virtual event, I don't want to require the address, so I can very easily change the business required and set it to not business required. So this is a very, very simple method for, and then whenever it is not yes, then I want to set the business required to required. And the field is address, and I want to set it to business required if it is no. So if yes, then set it to not business required. If no, then set it to not business required. And make sure that I saved and hit apply. I'm going to validate real quick. and I want to activate it. So what this allowed me to do very, very quickly is put together some business logic without writing, again, I've said this many times, I'm not writing a line of code, but I'm able to put in some validation logic right into my application. And let me see if I can refresh the screen and put it on here and have it work. So I'm going to refresh. I just applied if it's a virtual event, then I'm going to require the address. Oh, I need to make sure that I published it. When I bring the screen up, did I get my power event address not business required? If it's a virtual event, if it's not required, then set it to not business required. I need to update this very quickly. Business required. Activate it. Refresh the screen. And now I hope whenever I change this, it's a virtual event, the address isn't required. And if it's not a virtual event, we're requiring an address. Again, a functional analyst can come in, build out some business rules, and not have to write a line of code, but they can build out a very functional system that does validation on their system. So we're running out of time here, so let me jump back over to the slides. And I will add some information to it after the fact, and we can go in and you can look at it yourself, look at the event after the fact. But let me go back to the slides and look at some resources put up on Microsoft at the powerapps.microsoft.com, and it's a list that they keep updating on a periodic basis. Talks about the platform itself, talks about CDS, talks about all the related features and functionality coming along over time as they do releases. You can do the community plan here, go out and create your own environment and just start building a system. And then here is some targeted Microsoft documentation at docs.microsoft.com for the Common Data Service, for the Common Data Model. If you choose this for your system, go look at the Center of Excellence Starter Kit. It gives you a great way of working with your team, the industry accelerators I mentioned, and then go look at some of the community events. There's lots of other people out here doing events and putting on sessions for very targeted work or very broad work like we're talking about here. So that's about all I got for my session here. Thank you for listening, and hopefully it gave you some insight into why you would choose CDS for a business applications platform, and you go and try it out.